Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, I'm sorry. And here we are going to have a bit of a mixed bag today because I want to just very briefly finish discussing the mammals, and in particular by discussing our own particular group, which are the primates. That's a very brief discussion. And I'm then going to move straight on to talking about animal digestion and nutrition, which means that I am omitting one section which is in your calendar, which I'm going to ask you to do on your own. And that is the chapter on animal form and function. So I want you to read through that. I will post an old PowerPoint set to give you an idea of how to limit your reading a bit for that chapter, but that animal form and function is going to be your own responsibility. We're going to move straight on to digestion and nutrition after this section. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the primates. You have looked through, I hope, that large collection of all of the different kinds of mammal groups. A very, very diverse group. Certainly most of the mammals will all share characteristics, but there are very distinct characteristics for the different mammalian families and groups, orders and groups. And that is true of our own group, which are the primates. So we have a set of characters which we regard as being derived characters for the primates, which characterize the group. The very first one is that the hands and the feet are adapted for grasping. Now, you may not think that your own feet are adapted to grasping, but you can still grasp with your feet. Our feet have been highly modified because we are the only primates which have adopted a permanent upright stance. So our feet have lost their true prehensile ability. Nonetheless, these are characteristics of the primates, of these grasping hands and grasping feet. When you look at the fingers, the primates all possess nails. We don't have claws. The structure of the nail is flat and is different to the structure of the claw, and that is a reflection of the grasping ability of the fingers. Claws would impede our ability to grasp. The fingers of all of the primates have another characteristic, and that is they have fingerprints. Your fingerprints are due to the development of ridges on the surface of the skin, which are aligned with sweat glands underneath, which produce a friction ridge. It enables a grasp to be much more precise. In addition, we have relative to most of the mammals, we have a very large brain to body ratio. Our brains are large given our body size. In addition, we have a short jaw. We don't have a very lengthy prognathous skull. The eyes are characteristically point forward and are close together, and the images formed by the eyes overlaps to give us binocular vision, a sense of depth. There's also, throughout the primates, there's a marked amount of parental care, and the young actually learn a tremendous amount from the parents. In other mammals, much of the young acquire their abilities instinctually. In the primates, it appears that there is actually a cultural aspect to many primate societies in which young are actually taught. This leads to a very complex social behavior in many of the primates, ourselves not accepted. Okay, so a lot of these characters arose as an adaptation to living in trees. Most of the early evolution of the primates took place in the trees. They were climbers, and that's where the grasping hands, for example, arose from grasping feet as well. And we'll see in one group of primates, grasping tails. One of the characteristics of the primates, of this grasp of the primates, is that primates are able to oppose their thumbs. And they can take the thumb and they can put it together with any of the fingers. And now that varies a lot. One of the trends in human evolution has been to develop a very fine grasp between the thumb and the opposable fingers. If you want to have an idea of most of the other primates, just cock your fingers like that. And now try and move your thumb to oppose them. And that, it's a crude approximation, but it gives you an idea of that for most of the primates, while they can oppose their thumbs, it's difficult for them to do this very fine movement that we can do, very precise, with a tremendous amount of force, just with that little fine movement. Most of the primates, the hand is long, and the foot as well is long. The toes at the end are long, and the thumb is set so far back that it's difficult for them to do a precise grasp. So all of this, nonetheless, primates have tremendously improved dexterity compared to all of the other mammal groups. In addition, this improved depth perception was to facilitate movement through trees, for example. You can imagine if you're rapidly moving through a set of trees, locomoting somehow, and doing it jumping, etc. You want a good idea of where branches, etc. are in front of you. You need really good binocular vision for good depth. And it also led to a really improved hand-eye coordination, which we believe may have been one of the factors that led to favoring of larger brain size, with this to improve the ability of the animal to locomote under what was in fact really complex, difficult circumstances, moving rapidly through the trees. And believe it or not, this is what we believe the very earliest ancestors of the primate group looked like. This sort of rodent-like animal, this is actually a tree shrew, and we still have, there are still tree shrews are still exist nowadays. But this, we believe, this is one of the very earliest of the mammal line, which would lead to the primates. Very, very old. This is way more, probably 125 million, 200 million years ago, or 125 million years ago, I would guess, somewhere around there. So it would be, this would probably have coexisted with the very last of those synapsids that had begun to adopt these truly mammalian traits. A small arboreal animal, and all of these, as these advantages began to be made use of, this led to the development of the primate line. So that's, here's how it sits, that kind of ancestral primate. They actually arose long before here, but the divergence into the primate groups that we see now started about 70 million years ago. And it really exploded after about 60 million years ago. Why would that be? Because all of those dinosaur reptilian lines had disappeared. And this is timed with the explosion of all of the other mammal groups as they begin to exploit these new niches that have become available. So here I'll run through and then we'll have a look at some pictures of the different groups. First of all, these are all the extant groups, excepting for this one here, which is marked for you. These are all living groups of primates on the planet. The first group are these fascinating animals, the lemurs, lorises, and galagos. Those are also called the bush babies. These are a group we believe are more primitive. The lorises and bush babies exist in Africa. The lemurs, they only exist on Madagascar. And we believe that these are similar to very early primates, which arose soon after the ancestral primate division. A very fascinating group, still with many what are regarded as rather primitive primate features. Nonetheless, they show all of the primate features. They have grasping hands, etc., front forward pointing eyes, etc., etc., etc. The lemurs exist only on Madagascar because Madagascar separated off from Africa before it developed any other primate fauna. And the lemurs survived there where they did not survive in the face of competition from the new primate groups that were to develop on Africa and Asia themselves. All of there are a few others in Africa, the bush babies and the lorises, but they're a rather obscure sort of group. On Madagascar, the lemurs very, very diverse, very interesting, but unfortunately highly, highly endangered, mostly due to habitat destruction. Now, there is another group called the tarsiers, which look rather like the prosimians, but are believed to be more closely allied to the rest of the primates. And we won't talk about them. Their position is actually a little bit controversial. Some people put them in here with the prosimians. We won't talk about them anymore. But the group that we'll spend a little time talking about is all of the rest, which are called the anthropoids or the anthropoidea. And the anthropoidea are the monkeys and the apes. And that includes us. We're included in this group. So the monkeys are divided into two groups. The first are the old world monkeys, and the other are the new world monkeys. Now, this is rather interesting because they are believed to have separated about 25, well, they arrived in South America about 25 million years ago. And how they got there is a little bit mysterious, but the division was much earlier, about 40 million years ago. The monkeys, both of them, first of all, the New World monkeys, those are the South American monkeys. The Old World monkeys, Africa and Asia. And they, in fact, do look rather similar, but the New World monkeys have one major characteristic, which is different, and that is they have a prehensile tail. It almost behaves like a fifth limb for them. The Old World monkeys have a distinct tail, but it is not prehensile. So that is one of the major differences between them. And we'll see a picture in a minute. The rest here, the gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and us, and all of our now extinct relatives. We are all in a group which it used to be called the Anthropoidea. I'm sorry, the Hominoidea. That is not commonly used anymore, but the Hominoidea, because these are all apes, gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and humans and their relatives. We are all apes. We have a few characteristics, but the one which immediately stands out for all of us is we do not have a tail. Well, we have a tail, but it is a small remnant of a tail. It's a small part of the bottom of our spines called the coccyx. And it's a few fused vertebrae, which are just a remnant of a tail. And so all of the apes have that characteristic. They have some other characteristics as well, but one of the things is I hesitate to say it, but most of the apes appear to have a higher intelligence. They seem to have a higher problem-solving ability than the monkeys. I hesitate to say that because it's very difficult to measure, but this appears that this is a characteristic of the apes. And very especially of the orangutans, gorillas, etc. The gibbons sit outside a little bit of the ape group. They are distinctly apes. So gibbons, orangutans, those are Asian. Gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos, and all of the humans and their extinct relatives, all African. So remember that the whole group, the monkeys, apes, are the Anthropoidea. This word here, you can learn it, the Hominoidea. That's the apes, us and our relatives. We'll see that, in fact, we also belong in another little group, another clade of us and our very close relatives called the hominins. Anyway, here's a lemur, very, very beautiful animals. And there is just, let's look at that face, and there is something in that look. There is something there which is somewhat different, I think, to most other mammals. It's something to do probably with this fully forward-facing eyes and everything that give it a look that we instantaneously recognize as being primate. Grasping hands, here you can see the thumb there, the rest of the fingers. In the lemurs, the feet are extremely prehensile as well, but the tail is not. So that whole group we call the prosimians. So now the monkeys arose in the old world. They arose in Africa and Asia. The colonization of South America by monkeys is a little bit mysterious because the continents had already begun to separate when that colonization took place. So it had to have been by some mechanism such as rafting from Africa to South America as the continents moved apart. But the continents then were very, very close together anyway, especially in the north, South America and Africa, the northeast of South America and the northwest of Africa actually lay quite close together. So it's conceivable that there could have been some exchange between the continents. But since about 25 million years ago, they have proceeded along entirely different evolutionary lines and have radiated into very different kinds of ecological niches. Here's a New World monkey. This is a spider monkey. And remember the one thing about them, they have this very muscular prehensile tail, which they can actually use in locomotion. They can actually hang by their tails, which other monkeys cannot do. You see a monkey at the zoo hanging by its tail, it's a New World monkey. It's not an Old World monkey. The Old World monkeys, a very, very diverse group, not surprisingly, because they are a very ancient group and a very successful group of primates. Occupy many different habitats throughout Africa and Asia, and there are even European monkeys as well in the south, in the Mediterranean. So now the apes diverged from the Old World. They last shared an ancestor with the Old World monkeys 25, 30 million years ago or so. And there are 4 genera that I want you to remember. The first is called Pongo, and these are the orangutans. Orangutans are an Asian group, very, very highly specialized habitats. They tend to live in mangroves and in forests. They are herbivorous, and they have very specialized feeding requirements. And unfortunately, because of that, they are very, very highly endangered because their habitats are subject to such tremendous pressure from human beings, especially nowadays. Unfortunately, the forests where they live are being leveled wholesale for the planting of palm for palm oil extraction. And my advice, always look at products and see if they have palm oil in them. And if they do, try to restrict your purchase of palm oil, because it's leading to massive, massive habitat degradation throughout the Far East. The next group, so orangutans are Asian. We won't talk so much about the gibbons, but this is the group that we are really interested in. These are the African apes: gorilla, gorillas, pan. There are 2 species of pan, and one are the chimpanzees, and the other are called the bonobos, and they are very distinct. They used to be thought to be just like races of the same species, but they are not. They are completely, completely different. We are actually much closer in many ways to the bonobos than we are to the chimps, but we are very, very close to both of them genetically. And then the third group that we are going to consider is the only living member now is our genus Homo. And the genus Homo is, our species is sapiens, Homo sapiens, and we are the last of that line. We are the last of the genus. There have been many other members of the species, of the genus Homo, and there have been many other species which were closely aligned with Homo, as we'll see in a while. And those we refer to as hominins. Man, Homo, and the hominins are those species which are closely allied to Homo, to man. But we need to remember our allegiance as well to the other African apes. We're actually genetically quite close, even to the gorilla, but very close to the genus Pan. So here are the gibbons are their exact allegiance to the rest of the apes is not absolutely clear. They look very, very different, in fact, to most of the apes, but that is more a reflection of their adaptation to their environment, which is they have extremely long arms, which allows them a special kind of locomotion called brachiating. They swing from arm to arm through the trees. That's called brachiating. They're highly specialized for brachiating. They can locomote on the ground as well, and they can even walk upright for a short distance. And this is the orangutan. Orangutans, again, are Asian group, but these are the ones we're particularly interested in, and these are the African apes: the gorilla, the chimpanzee here, and this here, which is the bonobo. We are, in fact, most closely related here to the bonobo, but very, very closely related to the chimp as well. We share way more than 90% DNA similarity with both of them. So the whole study of man and his relatives is called paleoanthropology, and it is paleoanthropology. The anthropology part comes because most of our understanding is from studying fossil skeletons. The whole study of paleoanthropology looks at fossil skeletons and tries to build an idea of the story of man's evolution. And the more we know, the less we know. The more we seem to find out, the less we really seem to understand, because it's in fact a very, very complicated story. There are many, many, many species of hominin, or there have been rather, many, many species of hominin for several million years. And we look at all of these species, and we call something a hominin if we believe that it is more closely related to us, to humans, to Homo, than it is to groups like the chimpanzees. So there, paleoanthropologists have identified 25, 30 species of extinct hominin. So there have been many species which have been closely related to us, which have gone extinct. But when we look at the hominins, we see three predominant trends. And these are, first of all, the development of upright gait. Now, when we go back here, none of these apes actually walk upright with efficiency and ease or for any length of time, but all of them can spend a certain amount of time upright. But their anatomy is such that upright walking is very inefficient for them. So let's just have if you have a look here at this bonobo, you can see the problem. This here, all along there, is the pelvis. It's a long bone structure there. It's not the short structure that we have. And look how the legs come off the pelvis here. Imagine this animal with this long pelvis now trying to stand upright. They are not going to be able to stand upright except to sway the back like this and push the bottom out very awkwardly and have the legs straddling in an awkward kind of gait. And that is exactly how they walk when they walk upright. They are constrained by their anatomy because their anatomy is designed for walking on all fours or else for climbing. And in the chimps and the bonobos, they spend actually most of their time on the ground. They spend some time up in the trees, but most of the time on the ground, but most of it on all fours. That is how they walk most efficiently. And they walk on their knuckles. So they walk by folding the front feet to pad on the knuckles. Through as we trace the evolution of the hominins, we can see in the anatomy that those constraints which constrain them to walking on all fours are gradually lost. And it appears to become extremely advantageous to move to an upright stance. Why? We don't exactly know, but there is one theory which may interest you. And that is that it gives, if you stand upright, it gives you a much wider view around your environment. And the evolution of this hominin line began at a time of great climatic change in Africa, where many of the forests were dying out and being replaced by savanna, by grassland. And there it would have been very advantageous to be walking, if you had to move at all, walk upright so that you could see around you for a distance, and you could evade predators, spy suitable places to go and feed, etc., etc., etc. That's the first trend, development of upright gait. The second trend we see is that there is increasing usage of tools. Now, as we come back here, we can see some tool using and even tool making, even in these groups, especially in the chimpanzees and bonobos. They will actually take something they will modify it to use it as a tool and then go and use it. Now that's really a complex process. For example, they will be at a termite nest and want to get termites out of the nest to eat them. What they will do is they will go away. They will pick up a twig, they will select a twig, strip the twig of leaves and bark and make a long, thin, whip-like thing, and then go back to the termite nest and stick it in the holes of the termite nest. Termites grab onto it and they pull it out and they eat the termites. All of that requires considerable thinking and planning and problem solving. They've got to appreciate the problem, first of all, and they think to a certain extent in the abstract, are able to leave the site of the problem, go away, produce a solution, and return to the problem. You see, this is complex, quite complex stuff. And as we look through the evolution of the hominin line, we see increasingly that they are able to not only use a tool, for example, pick up a rock and smash something with it. They're actually able to take rocks and begin to modify them and produce different kinds of tools, things to hammer with, things to crush with, things to cut with. They can produce, as we move through the hominin line, we see increasing ability to do this, to create and use sophisticated tools. Along with this, along with both of these trends, we see an increasing brain size. The brain size of the hominins gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it is especially associated with the development of very subtle traits like improved tool use, but then ultimately with things like art and obvious ability for abstract thought and that sort of thing. So there are some characters. It's very difficult to say where in the line that we're going to see human, we can look at something and say that's a human. We tend to think that only Homo sapiens is human. And that may well be true in scientific terms. But as I'll show you in a minute, the line becomes very blurred. And the things that really mark the lines at which we begin to think things are human are, first of all, the adoption of complete upright bipedal locomotion with no resort to walking on all fours. The second is the development of this large brain. And we believe, along with that, the development of complex language, the ability to develop symbolic thought. And I myself always say that one of the things which marks humans as being human is artistic expression, because artistic expression, which, by the way, also extends to writing. It's not only just drawing or sculpting or whatever, but writing. This is abstract thought now taken and made material in front of the person. I think that is a very profound acquisition, a skill to acquire. It's in many ways an extension of the production and use of tools, but it's production and use of something of complete abstract value. It has no, you don't pick up a painting and chop a tree with it. We see also distinct anatomical changes, and especially in the skull and the face, which eventually lead to what we regard as being the truly human kind of skull. And surprisingly enough, we see changes in the anatomy of things like the gut. We believe that there are changes in the anatomy of the gut. And this was associated with the fact that we were changing the methods by which we acquired food and prepared food as well. So this is what I meant by artistic expression. Here is one from South Africa. This is one of the early, we believe, one of the early members of a group that we would truly regard as being Homo sapiens. And this is from 70,000 years ago. May not look like much, but it's an artifact of huge importance. It's the very earliest example we have of somebody sitting down and actually scratching a design. This is just scratched into clay-like soft rock called ochre. And they've scratched the design, and they've scratched it there purely, it appears, purely to please themselves. They are doodling. This is an immense development, right? Because these are creatures which are living extremely difficult lives. They're living on the edge the whole time. They are preyed on by predators. They fight for food. They have to fight for space. They probably fight one another, even then. But nonetheless, here at some point, this person had time to sit down and just do this, and it gave them pleasure to create something. It has no use. It has no practical use, but they did it. 20,000 years ago, this is fully human. This is Cro-Magnon man, and these are European groups, and they are the ones who are most famous for this flowering of artistic ability. And this probably, to their minds, did have use. This was probably ritualistic and some religiously symbolic. But what I mean by this, it has no practical use, right? You can't take this picture and bash a leopard over the head with it. But you can invoke spiritual ability, the spiritual powers, or whatever it is that they saw in doing this work. And not only that, they took the trouble to make it beautiful. And that is, I think, very important. So, but we need to always remember our close affinities. We are 99% identical to chimpanzees. This is a strange statistic, but because it doesn't actually mean that much. In fact, we have a huge similarity to many other mammals as well, not 99%. But I would say we're probably, the current statistic would be that we have about 94% identical to the chimpanzees on most of our functional genes. But there's one group of genes where we do differ. And these are called the regulatory genes. These are the genes which actually switch things on and off, switch other genes on and off. They switch processes on and off. And because we differ in 19 of the regulatory genes, it means our whole neurological functioning is quite different. Our functioning can be completely different, in fact, to that of chimpanzees and bonobos. We will see similarities, but in actual fact, there is substantial difference between the two different groups. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time discussing the human evolution. I'm simply going to use this diagram to point a couple of things out to you. This begins 7 million years ago. This is after we and chimps and bonobos have separated from a common ancestor. And there is a line of primates, which we believe our earliest example is this one here called Sahelanthropus. And Sahelanthropus interests us. It's an African fossil from Chad, I believe. And it's because it's a small animal. The skull looks rather chimpanzee-like, small brain, and the front of the skull looks very chimpanzee-like. But what interests us is that it obviously spent some time upright. So this is one of the earliest of this line where we see some movement towards it being upright, adopting an upright stance. We move through, and the first thing to point out is look how many, these are all quite closely related to us. These are all hominins. So they are closely related to us, but look how many there are. And we probably only have a smattering of the fossils, or only a paltry idea about the number that there were. It was probably a very, very diverse group throughout Africa. The ones that you may have heard of is Australopithecus. Now, this is several million years later than Sahelanthropus. And the Australopithecines were a group which spent a lot of time upright, if not all of their time upright. They still, however, had very small brains. They were not, their brains were not very much bigger than those of a chimpanzee. But the later Australopithecines undoubtedly used tools. That is that there is evidence, for example, that they would pick up rocks and use them to break open bones at a kill, or maybe even to kill. And there is some evidence that they may have modified those, or that they selected something which worked well and they kept it and used it repeatedly. The next group to pay attention to are these. Now, this is the first one that gets this name, Homo. And this is Homo habilis. Homo habilis looks very Australopithecine, excepting that it does have a larger brain. But Homo habilis, this means handyman. And handyman, because this is one of the first groups which extensively modified things as tools. They were the first. They are very beautiful hand axes and things like that associated with Homo habilis remains. So they were actively making tools for a specific use, and their tools differ. Some tools for crushing, some for hitting, some for grinding, some for cutting, etc., etc. So they were true tool makers, and their brains were larger. Their brains were larger than those of Australopithecus. So we've got these trends: a trend towards upright walking, a trend to increase brain size, a trend to increase tool ability to use tools and conceive of tools as well. This is the next group, which is really important. This is Homo erectus. And Homo erectus was about 5'5" tall or so. Very, very distinctly, it began now to look extremely human. And the reason for that is look at the face. And you'll see, compare it to this. Look at that, how the face sticks out. Now, Homo erectus, the face has become much flatter. And it's still got this big brow ridge, but look at the size of the brain. This is the most, probably the most successful of all of the species of Homo that has ever lived until us. At least it's currently way more successful than us, because look how long it existed for. It existed for millions and millions of years, and it coexisted with various other species of Homo as well. Homo erectus is fascinating. Notice it's not Homo sapiens is a completely different species, but I'll tell you a couple of things about Homo erectus. A famous anthropologist, Margaret Mead, was once asked, what is the sign of civilization? When do we say that a species is civilized? And most people say, oh, when they're making lots of tools or whatever. She said, when they show compassion. Homo erectus, there have been, for example, there are some skeletons of Homo erectus of very, very old specimens. Probably for Homo erectus in 50s would probably be very old. With no teeth, for example, and with evidence of extensive arthritis. So they were basically crippled. Those very elderly Homo erectus show signs of just having died naturally. In fact, there are even signs that they had been buried, that they had been placed somewhere after death. Somebody looked after them. They were no longer useful members of the Homo erectus society, which was, by the way, was a band of Homo erectus who lived together. They were no longer contributing, but they were cared for. One of the most interesting Homo erectus skeletons is that of a boy of about 17 or 18 years old who was cerebral palsied. He had suffered oxygen deprivation at birth and was extensive. It was obvious that he was completely crippled. He had never been a useful member, useful in the sense of being able to go out and hunt or gather things. He had to be cared for from the time he was a baby till the time he died. These are not animals that behave like this. This shows a considerable complexity of social interaction. And they are now, we also believe that they are now beginning to find some artifacts that look artistic, very, very controversial, but they may be artistic artifacts associated with Homo erectus. Homo erectus was also the very first of our line who knew how to use fire. They could at least maintain fire, if not make fire. And they certainly used fire for cooking, because there are the remains of meals have been discovered that have been cooked on a fire. This also enabled, use of fire also enabled Homo erectus to migrate out of Africa and very far. They migrated throughout Europe, all the way to Britain, and all the way over to Sumatra and the Far East. So they were extremely, extremely successful group. But they were superseded by the really human groups, I would call them. These are Homo neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens. These are very large-brained, much bigger than Homo erectus. Homo erectus wasn't small-brained, but Homo neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens, both much bigger-brained, it appears, ultimately, much more successful. The extinction of Homo erectus coincides with the rise of these groups, but even this species, Homo neanderthalensis, which was just incredibly similar to us. Many people say it should be Homo sapiens. Very, very similar to us and probably interbred with the Homo sapiens line. So that's the story from there to there over 7 million years. And we have only scratched the surface. There are probably many more things to be discovered. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. And we're going to start at least our section on animal nutrition. I'll just remind you at this point, please, that I am omitting the section on animal form and function. And I'm going to ask you to read that through on your own, and I'll put up the PowerPoint section that I did a number of years ago, just to give you an idea of the sorts of things that I want you to pull out of that section. Okay, so let's talk about animal nutrition from now on. Many of the things we're going to be talking about are a physiological function, particularly in human beings, but in other organisms as well. So why on earth do we need to feed? When we look at living things all over the planet, we realize that there are two groups of organisms, really. And they are those which are able to use the sun's energy, for example. They're able to use a source of energy like light and take simple things, simple molecules, carbon dioxide, water, and put them together into complex molecules. Why do they do that? They do it, first of all, because we need molecules. All living things, we require actual matter. We require matter to build ourselves and to continually replace stuff that is worn out. We need a source of molecules the whole time. Second of all, we need a source of energy. All of the processes that take place in our metabolism require a constant input of energy, because all of our energetic processes are wasteful, and we radiate energy in the form of heat, which is purely wasted. So we have to have a continual source of energy, and we have to feed ourselves to acquire the molecule. We have to have a source of molecules. Things which can do it by using light and simple carbon dioxide and water, we call the autotrophs. And for the moment, we're not going to discuss them, because our interest is particularly in the heterotrophs, just for the moment. Then the heterotrophs are absolutely dependent upon molecules which have already been manufactured. So that we are dependent on a source of complex molecules, both to provide us with the atoms that we need to build biomass, but also as a source of metabolic energy. And acquiring those molecules is what we do when we eat. Nutrition refers to the input of all of the molecules we need. So the way in which the animals take up and process the food, that we refer to as nutrition. Animals fall into these three categories, by and large. Some of them cross over a little bit. But by and large, they fall into the categories of herbivores, which eat mainly plants and algae as well. In other words, depend solely upon autotrophs as their source of food. Carnivores eat other animals. So they are dependent on a second stage. The herbivores take up plant material or autotroph material and convert it into animal tissue. Carnivores eat other animals. They are eating the animal tissue, which has been converted from plant tissue. Omnivores, that is us. We are a typical omnivore. We consume both. We consume animals and we consume plants as well. And we are actually required to do so. This is not really a choice. We are omnivorous in all of our anatomy and everything. Human beings sometimes elect not to be omnivores, but to be purely herbivorous. And that you can do, provided you know what you're doing. As we'll hear in a while, there are some traps in doing this, because we are really designed as omnivores. But animals will do many things in different circumstances. Animals in general are very adaptable. So we might see things cross over between these. For example, many animals will scavenge. right? They will not necessarily hunt down and eat other animals, but if under many circumstances, they will scavenge carcasses and this sort of thing, even though they may spend much of their time as herbivores or omnivores. Carnivores, we have to think very carefully. If you've ever seen a lion kill, you'll see that one of the very first things that carnivores will often do is tear open the gut of the prey and consume contents of the gut, because that is a source of vegetable material, and vegetable material that may contain things which are really important, nutrients, which they don't necessarily get from meat. So even a carnivore may be acquiring a vegetable part of its diet. We just overwhelmingly see them eating meat. So as I said, the diet provides chemical energy, first of all. That chemical energy is converted during processes, for example, of cellular respiration, is converted into ATP, and that is what powers our metabolic processes. We require these organic building blocks, that is organic carbon, but also things like nitrogen, a little bit of sulfur, things like that as well, to synthesize our organic molecules. We continually do so because organic molecules are continually broken down and need to be replaced. In growth, all of that material has to be converted into the substance of the animal that is growing. In a mature animal, these substances are used to replace stuff that is broken down and needs to be replaced. There's one other set of nutrients that we don't always think about, and these are referred to as the essential nutrients. For the most part, physiologically, metabolically, we are very, very good at converting substances from one to the other. We can use proteins as a source of fuel, for example. We can break down carbohydrates and build all sorts of other molecules out of them. We can take oils and things and change them and end up making cell membranes. We're very good at changing molecules from one kind to another. But there are certain molecules which we simply cannot produce. We cannot synthesize them at all. And we have to acquire them from our diet. And these are called the essential nutrients. So they are substances which are required by our own cells, but which we cannot synthesize. It varies from animal to animal, by the way, as to what are the essential nutrients, and from organism to organism. But I've mentioned some of the ones that are really important to us. There are 4 classes of essential nutrients, and these are certain amino acids. We are able to manufacture, first of all, in building our proteins, we only use 20 amino acids. About half of them for human beings, just a little bit more than half, we can manufacture ourselves, provided we've got a source of nitrogen and carbon and nitrogen, everything. We can manufacture our own amino acids if we need to. But about half, just less than half, we are unable to synthesize them, and we need to acquire them in our food. A lot of them we can acquire just in a normal diet. A lot of them we can acquire from vegetable material, for example. But there are 1 or 2, this is why I mentioned about being vegetarian. There are 1 or 2 which you have to be careful of, which are poor in a vegetable diet, which we normally acquire from a meat diet. But that's not the end of the world, because you can actually make sure that you are eating certain foods which are rich in those amino acids. It's just our normal diet. The plants are not rich in some of the amino acids. Then there are a few fatty acids. Now remember what fatty acids are. They are those long chain lipid molecules with an acidic end, and the essential fatty acids are ones. Many of our fatty acids we can synthesize perfectly happily from other fatty acids. Any lipid source we can use, but there are certain fatty acids which we are completely unable to manufacture, and those we require in our diet. The next group of essential nutrients are the vitamins, and we'll have a look at some of the vitamins in a minute. And vitamins perform many different functions in the body. Very frequently, they are coenzymes. They're associated with metabolic processes, for example, like respiration and that sort of thing as well. There are basically two groups. There are water-soluble and lipid-soluble vitamins. We'll see a few of them in a minute. The next set of essential nutrients are minerals, and these are specific atoms, specific ions usually, which we require in order for metabolic processes to take place. Often in these, both vitamins and minerals, we often require them only in very, very low concentrations. Just a small amount is all that we need. Okay, so here I'll finish off with this. These are all the whole slew of the vitamins that we require. I don't require you to know all the different vitamins or what they do. What I want, this table is there for you if you are interested. But what I want you to do is just flip through here and see. Look, first of all, here are all the B vitamins there. And you'll see that many, many, many of them are either coenzymes themselves or are components of coenzymes. And remember, the coenzymes that we have heard the most about are things like FAD, flavine adenine dinucleotide, NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and these are all vitamins. The vitamin Ds are components of these coenzymes. They interact in many, many different metabolic processes. These are all water-soluble vitamins, and these are the fat-soluble vitamins here. If I want you to know anything at all about I would suggest that you look through the fat solubles, which are vitamin A, which is a component of visual pigments, vitamin D, which is we'll hear about again later. Vitamin D is produced, it's not an essential vitamin, it's produced by sunlight impinging on the skin. And it's very important, especially in calcium metabolism. And then vitamin E, you've probably heard about, is very commonly sold as a health aid, and probably the one thing that I wanted to take home from this whole list. All of these vitamins are acquired, and except for one or two, like vitamin D, which we do synthesize, are acquired from a healthy diet. And at any diet rich in nuts, vegetables, green vegetables especially, any diet that has those in them, you are going to get enough vitamins. You need vitamins in very, very low concentrations. If you take additional vitamins, you take a vitamin supplement, it's probably not going to do you any harm unless you take it in very large quantities. But I have to tell you that most of the vitamin that you take from vitamin supplement ends up in one place, and that is in the sewers, because you excrete these vitamins, especially the water-soluble vitamins. You will excrete them extremely quickly. Several of the oil-soluble vitamins, the fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, are actually toxic. you have to be very careful the amount that you take in, because you accumulate them in your fats. They're not rapidly metabolized. Okay, so just read through this. It's just interesting to see what they participate in. But as I say, I don't need you to remember the details. And we'll stop there, and I'll continue with this at our next class.